Hey, buddy, how you doing?
We can hear you, we can see you. Everything's good right off the bat. Welcome to the stream, buddy. How you doing? How's life?
Life's pretty good. I think see me, hear me without any drama. That's a first. I don't think
I
that's ever happened before.
You got the tech down cold. I'm proud of you, buddy. I'm proud of you. And you even got the double mirror just in case, right? The one way, one the other way. Doesn't matter where you go. It's always at least one will be readable, okay? And that's
That's
good.
the non-thong special. That's how you get all the bitches. I watched the stream. I figured it out.
How many bitches have you gotten so far from it?
Well, I'm married, so just the one. But you know what? I think it's going to work out. So there's that.
Probably it's at least consistent. We'll see how it goes. Though. I'm wishing you the best for it. But for those of you who may not know, okay, or for those in my audience who may not know, Ryan, why don't you tell people who you are, what you do, why we should listen to you, etc. Introduce yourself. Go ahead.
So I'm Ryan Mullally. I'm a former philosophy student, former teacher, current lawyer, and enjoyer of internet debates of all kinds, and incredibly frustrated viewer of the recent Wick versus Andrew Wilson debate, where I just deeply hoped that the subject of what is the foundational moral claim for America was going to be broached, but it kind of, for those who watched it, went a different direction, which I think we probably should talk about. And then hopefully talk about what exactly is America's foundational moral claim, which I think has gotten kind of lost in the sauce. I feel like our civics is failing us, and that there's actually an answer to that question, and it's written down, and we should know it, and those of us who consider us classic liberals should be willing to defend it.
The problem is that I don't think it's that our civics are failing us. I think that it is more of a question of bad actors who are trying to redefine it in real time. And I think that a lot of them, especially the more honest ones, will just acknowledge, like, sure, yeah, these are foundational principles, but we reject them. They're not working, and we need to go to something else. We need to transition to something else. And I think that I see this more and more often, especially. I've always seen it to an extent on the left. Okay, there's always been some kind of growing up, at least, right? This kind of like rejection of or the painting of the founding as somewhat of a moral failing, right? And they'll usually point to things like slavery, things like how we treated the Native Americans and all that, the Trail of Tears, all these things, and to be kind of like moral failings. And America was built on a immoral foundation. Uh, Nowadays, I see a lot of the people on the right attacking the founding principles, but from a different angle, right? And I think this is kind of summed up, and a good example of this is in the questions, I guess, that I want to talk about today. But I'm going to let you take the lead for first, right? But I want to talk about the ideas of what is a heritage American versus the opposing idea of a propositional nation. And we'll talk about what those are and things like that. Just to lay my cards on the table, I think America is a propositional nation. I think it was laid out in the Declaration of Independence that that's what we were, right? And I think the history of our country bears that out. I think the idea of heritage Americanism is just blood and soil rhetoric, and I reject it entirely. But I told you you would be taking the lead on this, so why don't you start us off and we can talk about what you want to talk about. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that the left's rejection of what I would call, I would agree with you also that it's a proposition. It's a philosophy. It's the American moral claim. It's a moral philosophy, and the left's rejection of that, and my kind of, which probably happened long before I kind of did my leaving the left, but that was why it happened when I recognized it. And the right, I think it's a newer thing, but in some ways it's the old story, right? Like America is unique. Most nations are ethno-states, theocracies, blood and soil. Like they really are. There is a foundation which is purely about something that's kind of a more traditional basis for a country, which is, like, let's just call it blood and soil. That's what it is. And America built on that. And we said, not only are we a place and a people, but we are also this proposition. And this is a proposition that others can partake in. And it does have a philosophical basis to it. And I feel like there's forces on both the left and the right that want to upset the apple cart. The left is upset that, these moral principles get in the way of equity or whatever their new project is. So they want to knock it all down to start over again and build their utopia. And the right is upset that these moral principles get in the way of them going back to, a theocracy or nationalism or some other form, reductive form of government that would suit them, or in their mind would suit them better. And I think that part of what's happened for those of us who occupy like the classical liberal position is we've been a little bit tentative. We tend to say, like, let's all live and let live. And instead of forcefully defending what our view is and why it's good, there's a little bit of a sense that we should be infinitely affirming other people's views because we feel like legally they should have the right to have them. And that's a different thing. I'm not saying that we should take away anyone's right to speak. I'm saying that we should call them immoral. We should call their ideas bad, and we should win that fight because I think we're in the right.
Well, there's a lot there's a lot of ways I can pull on this Gordian knot we have, right? Because there's a lot of concepts that are at play. I think the first thing we should probably do is, since we both agree that there are a set of ideals, American foundational principles that I think make us a country and what our country generally operates, even though we're not perfect, like the country has violated its morals on several occasions during its history, right? What to you would you consider the foundational principles that America is built on? Let's get through that first, and then we can talk about all the other stuff.
Well, the great thing about that is that we don't have to guess. We have two key foundational documents, right? And like every debate bro, when you ask them a question, the first thing they're going to ask is legally or morally, because legally and morally are very distinct questions. And we have two documents. We have the Constitution that lays out our legal framework, and we have the Declaration of Independence that lays out our moral claim to nationhood. And we talk about the Constitution a lot because it matters for the news and for the law and for politics. So it's something we talk about a lot. We don't talk about the Declaration of Independence as much. And we really should, because it makes this very clear. I don't know if it would be helpful to share screen and put it up. I could try to do that, or if you want to do that, either way.
I don't know if it would be helpful because we'd have to mess with to get people to be able to read it and things like that.
Oh, okay.
It might be just helpful to just go over it, right? And just to hit the highlights. But gang, if you want to follow along, you can Google the Declaration of Independence, okay? It's a pretty famous document. It's pretty well out there. But it's surprising how many people have never actually read it.
It's worth reading, especially the first two paragraphs, which are really short and pretty much what we're going to be talking about now, because the Declaration of Independence is many things. It is a list of grievances that are very specific to that time and place. But like any philosophy, like any moral philosophy, you have to start with a foundational axiom. Like, you're not going to be able to prove a philosophy all the way down. You have to start with something that is irreducible. And our founders, being a mix of Christians and deists, were not one thing. They weren't all Christian. There were people who had different beliefs in the mix. Jefferson himself was a deist, meaning he believed in God but didn't believe in any specific claims of revelation or miracles. So when you ask him to write this document, he's not going to write down the gospel of Jesus Christ is our foundation. He's not going to write down the Torah as our foundation. What he wrote down was what I would call the moral floor. What is the common denominator that would be the moral foundation for people in that era? And that was the God of nature and natural law, meaning essentially the idea that, if I was going to make it as simple as possible, you believe in God, you believe that man has a special dignity. And you don't even have to believe those things to follow the Declaration of Independence. You just have to understand that's the context it was written in. And then from that, you say, well, there are certain inalienable rights that are vested in humans. It is intrinsic to who we are. It is not something the state gives them. It is higher than the state. And because these rights are intrinsic to us, when these rights are violated, it is unjust. And the way you measure the justice of a government is how well they honor these rights or how much they infringe them if they're being tyrannical. And once you have that established, then they can say, and England has violated our natural rights in the following ways. And therefore, we are morally righteous in rebelling against them. And it's not a petty thing. It's a big, long list of grievances because they acknowledge that minor grievances are not a reason for a rebellion. But if you don't have that common foundation, the idea that humans do have these natural rights, that they are not granted to them by the state, that they are intrinsic to who we are, then nothing about the American experiment makes any sense. That's the protection of natural rights is why we are a country. It's what we are here to do. It is our moral claim to existence. And I think that's been lost a lot in the way we talk about why it matters, for example, to protect constitutional rights.
I think that you're exactly right when it comes to like what the Declaration of Independence strove to do and to build an argument, basically, because this was it was propaganda. Let's be real. It was propaganda. It was an argument to the people. It was a call to action. It was, this is what our beliefs are. This is how our beliefs have been violated. And this is what we're going to do about it. Okay. And this is what we want everyone to kind of know why we are doing this, so we don't have to answer the question 100 million times. And I think that a lot of the reasons that people have kind of forgotten this is because we don't really talk about it. We talk about the issues of the day within the context of the day. Presentism is a thing, right? So we're not talking about why it is that the Constitution was built the way it is, but we're talking about what the Constitution says. It's a like kind of and I fall guilty of this at times, right? Where I'm talking about, okay, well, this is what the law says, right? This is what the Constitution says, but the question sometimes can become, should it? Should this be something that we want to uphold, right? So in your debates I've seen about some of the recent Supreme Court rulings, you argue a lot about what the law is, right? But I guess I want to talk with you today a little bit about what you think it should be. Not so much whether or not the law says what it says and whether that's good or bad, right? Or I'm sorry. Let me start over. I don't want to talk about what the law says. I want to talk about whether or not you think it should say that, whether or not it's good or bad. So I saw parts of your debate with Pisco about the immunity ruling, right? Do you think it is a good thing that we have a constitution that, I'm just going to grant you your legal arguments are correct here, right?
I did win the debate.
Right? Repeat that, I'm sorry.
I did win the debate,
yes,
so I think it's fair to grant.
Fair enough. Should that be the case? Because I don't know if it's healthy for our nation to have an executive who can basically almost entirely violate the spirit of the Declaration of Independence against its citizens, right? We have created a situation where he's got immunity from a lot of these things. And I don't know if that's a good thing.
Well, I think that if we're pivoting into law rather than moral claims.
Oh, we're talking about.
I'm sure we'll circle back to it.
Yeah.
There's a few points just to get out of the way. Like, my belief in natural law and America's foundational morality, all those things should, if I were a judge, impact my legal reasoning. Not at all. It should have no impact, because judges should be legal positivists. The question that judges are answering is, what does the law say? What ought the law to be? That's a very dangerous thing for a judge to want to decide. That's what Congress decides. That's what the people decide. They decide what the law ought to be. Judges are not there to do that. That is not their job. So when I'm making legal arguments, I try. It's very tempting to get stuck in these whirlwinds, but I try very hard to stay about what the law is, because it is not, the policy doesn't necessarily matter.
Sure.
It matters sometimes, but rarely.
But we both know what you think the law is.
Yeah.
I want to know. I do want to get you into the whirlwind, right? I do want to get to what I want to get past that. Again, giving your moral philosophy, and given we agree on kind of like the foundational principles of America, of liberalism, of individual rights, and how those are relatively sacrosanct and should be. I'm curious how you, what you think ought to be, right? Like what you think ought.
I don't think having prosecutions of former presidents is a good idea. I think it almost inevitably leads to very, very bad outcomes in terms of respect for the rule of law, in terms of the body politic, in terms of just like social coherence. And it's especially bad because the idea that the prosecutor's office, the DOJ, is independent is an act of grace. There's nothing in our system that makes that body actually independent. The president has tons of control over what the DOJ does and what they investigate and what they don't investigate. So what you get into is a situation like the one we had, where politically you could not impeach the president because he was too popular. His base supported him. They didn't think it warranted. I mean, sorry, you could impeach, but you couldn't convict.
Yeah.
But you could prosecute. And you could prosecute because prosecuting just requires a slim majority, not the actual supermajority that impeachment requires. And I feel like that's opening Pandora's box. And even if you think Trump deserved to be prosecuted, you have to ask yourself, how would we feel if Biden was being prosecuted right now for something that felt absolutely ginned up? Or even if it's not ginned up, most people violate federal law quite frequently, as we found out with the document cases, right? Because there's so much federal law, nobody even knows what it is. So the idea that a motivated prosecutor couldn't find a way in a friendly district to charge Biden with something strikes me as beyond the pale. Like, I'm sure they could find something. It's good that that's not happening. And I would rather live in a world where we weren't testing the boundaries of this norm. But if the norm has to turn into a law, I would prefer we don't have those prosecutions at all.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, and just since we're on this, it also left open a question that I also didn't want answered, which is, can the president pardon himself? We don't know. But if we were living in a world of political prosecutions without immunity, then we'd have to answer that question, because the president would just pardon himself every 4 years.
Why wouldn't you, right? I mean, it's the way to go about it. Though I do think that maybe we should, again, whether the law lets you or not, I do think it would probably be a good idea for future lawmakers to write into law an answer to that question. Does that make sense? And to make sure that presidents cannot.
I don't think they can.
I bow to your legal expertise here. I'm just saying what I would like to have happen, what I think would be a good thing to have happen, not whether or not it can. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. Based on how the immunity ruling came down, I think the pardon power is core and exclusive, so Congress has no power to regulate it. The answer is whatever the answer is. But hopefully we never know. Like, we went, 234 years without prosecuting a former president for his conduct in office. I'd like to go another 234. So hopefully we never figure this out.
I don't know.
I would love to never know the answer to this question.
I hope so too, but I'm worried, and I'm just gonna be real with you. I'm not a doomsayer that think we're not going to have an election in midterms or anything, or I'm not trying to say that. But I do feel as if the fundamental fabric of our nation and the culture of our nation is being ripped apart. I do feel that there are forces who are grabbing like who we are as Americans and our values and just tearing them to shreds. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to talk about today is the people on the right. We talked a lot about the left, right? I want to talk about the people on the right who are trying to rewrite what it means to be an American. So, can you kind of explain to the audience what your view of heritage Americans are? First of all, what does the term mean? What are some of your thoughts on it, etc.? And then we'll kind of get into the discussion.
Yeah, I think it will be helpful to back up a little bit and talk about
Go ahead.
how this threat comes from both sides, because it makes it, I think, more clear what's happening. So we agree America's a propositional nation, and
Yep.
I think we agree that the proposition is the protection of natural rights to the extent possible. I think there's no, unless you're like an ANCAP, you're going to say that some infringement is actually necessary. There's no possibility of a perfect government. There's no utopia, but you want to infringe as little as possible. And the word games that are being played around these terms, I think, are how we got into this mess. So when you see the threats on the left, oftentimes the word games, I mean, you'll have the historical attack, like what about slavery, et cetera. But then you'll also have, well, natural rights. Okay, we want to protect natural rights, but doesn't natural rights mean human rights? And doesn't human rights mean the policy that I want? And isn't the policy I want a right? And by now we're trying to morph natural rights into policy preferences, and the whole system collapses. On the right, you see a similar word game being played, where people talk about being a heritage American. They're talking about, no. Classical liberalism, like any other system, you judge it by its results. Its results are this never-ending catastrophe. What did Wilson call it? The progressive status quo, I think is the way he prompt was phrased.
He never really said, okay, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, right? Because I've already been like talking about it, right? But he didn't say much of anything. He would use words and define them in very vague ways, and there was nothing really to actually talk about or crunch into, right? Like he conflated nationalism with having a nation several times during the discussion. He wasn't really even able to talk about like how the Christian part of Christian nationalism related to what he wanted. It was just an exercise in him running around trying to avoid defining anything for 5 hours, 4 or 5 hours, however long that lasted. But I think that like the progressive status quo, what does that even mean? I'm still not sure. So.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to get into it if you've already talked about it, but I suspect you accepted a resolution that wasn't exactly to your taste in order to get the debate going, because
I wanted a liberal. I don't even know that you
think there is a progressive status
quo. There isn't.
Quo. Yeah.
I don't think that we live in a progressive status quo. Progressivism doesn't really. But even if he wanted to call it that, right? Under a progressive status quo, if he is defining what we live under now as a progressive status quo, then I mean, we are getting a lot of the things done that a Christian would like. The overturning of Roe v. Wade, pushing of more kind of Christian values in certain areas. I feel like Christianity and progressivism are compatible in a way that nationalism and Christianity are just not. But that might be an argument. We could have that argument if you wanted, but yeah.
Well, that's why I wanted, and we can get back to kind of the high-minded stuff in a second, but that's why I wanted some clarification from him about what he meant by Christian nationalism. Because, like, for example, if what he meant by Christian nationalism is, I think we should have, and I think we actually already have this in this country, but I think we should have an even more robust political action framework that promotes Christian politicians, people with Christian values. We vote them into office. We know that they're
liberalism. That's liberalism.
Well, exactly. That's totally compatible. If on the other hand you're saying, I think we should have a religious test and you can't hold office unless you've been baptized and go to church 3 times a week, now we have a problem, because that actually is contrary to what our propositional values are. And I feel like that was
Well,
That was purposefully glossed because there's nothing, as you said, there's nothing within like a classical liberal framework that prevents you from nominating a whole bunch of originalists to the bench who are going to rule in originalist ways, which is going to be very helpful to a lot of religious liberties because religious liberties are written into our Constitution. It's not optional. So, I was unclear what he meant by that.
I think that the clarity comes from my prior knowledge, and I did point it out in my opening statement. He called himself Big Papa Fascist for most of his online life before he transitioned to being Andrew Wilson, right? Like, this isn't something that he might be masking on now, but he never really has before. And even in the debate, he talked about how the Constitution is basically just a piece of paper, and also that we can use, in his words, that we were going to use liberalism to kind of get elected and then close the door behind us, basically thing. He doesn't really make it a secret what he wants, but what he tries to kind of couch it in these terms, right? That we find like, oh, we just want more Christian values in government. But that's not what he actually wants. And that's not what he's actually advocating for. But.
Well, and that's why I think it's useful to be precise about what the American moral proposition is. So you see when the games are being played with it, right? Like if you think about what natural law is philosophically, natural law is the idea that there are these objective moral obligations. There are objective moral duties that we can learn, like math or science. Like it's a study. We don't know the answers, and we can be wrong about them. So from a natural law perspective, the founders were wrong about slavery, or at least many of them were. Like they were wrong in the same way that people in the 1200s were wrong about advanced physics that we've learned since then. It's a thing they had to discover. So when you view it that way and you say, okay, we're talking about objective moral principles, we're talking about rights that are vested in us, not given to us. Then when a leftist says, well, what about slavery? The answer is pretty obvious. It's, well, yeah, that was a moral error, and it's a corrected moral error, and the framework allows for the correction, and we grow and get better over time. And when a rightist comes in and says, oh, well, weren't the founders all Christian, therefore we should all be Christian, that's who we are. You say, well, wait, hold on. Actually, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, Ben Franklin, there were a number of deists in the mix. They had a huge impact on what America's founding documents were because they weren't Christian. And there needed to be a framework that would work for everybody, not just for the Christians. That's not what our experiment was. It could have been, it wasn't. So once you see it, then the attack on it becomes very obvious because you're clear about where the line is.
And one of the things I think we disagree on, perhaps, I think our strongest disagreement is who is the bigger threat here when it comes to the attacks on these things. And while I think that you may have been correct, perhaps 10 years ago, that the left might have been, today I don't think it's a contest at all. I think that the right has rejected any claim to kind of being a morally centered, morally principled party, and perhaps it's because I've just interact with the right online too much. Maybe it's different in person, but I can only go with what I'm seeing, right? They have rejected their basic principles that they claim to hold on free speech, on free trade. Like the Republican Party of 15 years ago is a foreign country to the Republican Party today. I think let me read a quote actually about propositional nations, or I guess it's not about a propositional nations, but it's from Reagan, okay? And I think most, if not all, Republicans today would wince at these words, would reject these words. And let me just, it's real quick. Please allow me. He says, and that's all I have to say tonight except for one thing. The past few days when I've been at the window upstairs, I've thought a bit of the shining city upon a hill. The phrase comes from John Winthrop, who wrote it to describe the America he imagined. What he imagined was important because he was an early pilgrim, an early freedom man. He journeyed here on what today we'd call a little wooden boat, and like the other pilgrims, he was looking for a home that would be free. I've spoken of the Shining City all my political life, but I don't know if I've ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rock, stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds, living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get there. That's how I saw it and see it still. This quote, and I'm done quoting, by the way, flies in the face, I feel, of republicanism today, or the MAGAism, whatever you want to call it. And I think that the fundamental assault on that idea, one which I believe, like, I don't like Reagan's policies in a lot of ways, right? I'm not a Reaganist, okay? I think he was wrong more than he was right. But he nailed this one. He nailed this one. I think that one of our fundamental founding principles is that idea that anyone can be an American if they go through the proper procedures. But the Heritage American stuff and a lot of the right-wing rhetoric today just rejects that wholesale. And we could talk about the left, and we do on this channel all the time. But I want to focus on the right today because I think that you, as a centrist, right, have probably a unique perspective that maybe a lot on the left don't get from this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love the quote. It's one of my favorites as well. I think that the thing about immigration, which was in many ways the MAGA issue, right? Like that's the issue that Trump rode in on in 2016. It's the issue he won on in 2024 in a number of ways. I guess inflation as well, but really that's his hallmark issue. And I agree with you that there are elements on the right that are increasingly nativist, heritagist, or whatever frame you want to use it, where they're essentially using race, ethnicity as a proxy, right, in a way that I think strikes me as inappropriate, un-American. The thing that they're responding to is that we have a system that's set up that doesn't actually require that you buy into the American proposition to be here. And that is itself a problem, because if you invite a lot of people into a propositional nation and you don't actually have a system for making the proposition what it should be. And this was at the heart of the stuff on the left about like assimilation versus multiculturalism that was big in let's say 2014, 2015, 2016. Without some idea of assimilation, without an idea that you have to buy into the proposition to be here, you end up with a lot of discontent, let's call it. And then you end up with a solution that's coming from the right that is in many ways worse than the problem. And so I think there is a real danger there, because then people are going to say, well, how do I know that you've bought into the proposition? I know you look like me. Well, that's not going to work either, right? Because I think that is where that's where you see it going on the right quite often.
It breaks down. I've never seen anyone more un-American than some son of a rich guy, right? So who's been here, whose family has been here for generations, right? Son of a rich guy who's like, I'm a socialist and I think Russia's in the right, and I think, all this, the most anti-American bullshit you'll ever hear comes from the whitest kids you ever see, okay? That's all I'm saying. Like, I understand that there has been issues in America with immigration, in our immigration policy. It's something that it's a hard fix, because there's a lot of competing interests and competing issues with that, like asylum. The idea of, should we as a nation accept asylum seekers, okay? People who want to get away, who seek to be refugees. I generally think that we should, with caveats, right? There should be restrictions on that. There should be a vetting process, all these things, right? But I think it speaks well of a nation that we are able to do that. However, I think you are correct in that it has been, what's a good way to put it? Abused?
Oh, it's been beyond abused. I mean, have you ever been to a naturalization ceremony?
No, but I have the quote for the oath up.
Yeah. when I clerked, one of the great things about clerking for a federal judge is that once or twice a year, your judge will preside over the naturalization ceremony, and all the clerks go, and it's incredible. I mean, people are crying, they're wearing their church clothes, they've been working years for this, and it's a truly joyful and wonderful thing. Like it was, when you work in the judicial system, you see a lot of humanity at its worst. And this is seeing humanity at its best. It's really a wonderful moment. And I don't think that's celebrated enough. And also, when people talk, I know, like I talked to Pisco about this at one point, and he was saying, for example, what was he saying? He thought it was wrong for Biden to clamp down on immigration towards the election because it was illegal for him to do so, and he thought he was exercising powers he shouldn't have exercised. And absent from that discussion, and I think this is sort of the way the left talks about it, was any moral dimension there about saying, like, yeah, we want to be the shining city on the hill. We want the door to be open. We want people to come here who want to be here. And also, you have to buy in. Like, we're not letting in everybody who's going to come here. And then, what's the example I gave you months ago? It was like, what would happen if we invited in 100 million people who would vote for Sharia law? That would be a real problem. You have to agree with the moral proposition that what we're here to do is protect natural rights. That what we're here to do is to have a government that is limited and will not infringe on those rights.
But my problem is like that there is a greater, I consider a much greater threat now that they are, when the Groypers are looking at J.D. Vance's family and calling him and his family un-American because of their skin color, or when they look at what it was, Vivek Ramaswamy, a lot of backlash from the right against him, calling and hinting that he's not American. And look, I disagree with both of these individuals a lot, okay? Especially J.D. Vance. But to say that they are not American is just this idea that if you do not look white, and let's be clear about what they mean, that you're not American. It's anti-American, and I know I'm using the word American a lot, but it is. It's just fundamentally anti-American, and I feel that way of thinking is growing like a cancer on the right, and I worry, right? I worry that it's just going to. They call themselves post-liberal.
Oh no, it's gonna get worse. It's gonna get worse. If I don't know if you saw. Both Jordan Peterson and Glenn Loury at various points I think they said it very eloquently, where they said, like, one of the problems with the post-liberal left is that it will create a backlash on the right. And the backlash it's going to create, and I think they both called it dead on, is going to be specifically male, specifically white, and specifically dangerous because it's so cohesive. Like there is actually an ethnic identity that underpins it, that it is actually a demographically identifiable, non-propositional group of people. And that makes it very dangerous because it is harder to dislodge. In many, in many ways, the leftists, and maybe this is answering your question about what's more dangerous, the thing about the leftists is they don't vote. So on some level, their ideas, I would say,
but they will make hit pieces in Wired about like people. We'll get into that maybe about chorus.
But so in some ways they're less dangerous because they just don't matter that much.
Yep.
And on the right, it is cohesive, and at least for now, they are voting, and the backlash is very real. And I think, I don't know. I don't know if this comes across, but I try to be very conscientious about calling balls and strikes on this stuff. Like when you wanted someone to argue about like Kilmar Garcia against ProLogix, like, yeah, happy to do it. Am I to the right of you politically? For sure. But like, happy to have that argument, like, am I going to talk about like Trump was right with his free speech stuff when he's asking universities for video footage of protesters? Absolutely not. And I think that you can what we need to do is be more clear about what the boundaries are, because there's room for principled disagreement within the lines. And I think what's happening now is that there's a lot of people who get a lot of attention who exist way to the right and way to the left of anything that would resemble an okay line for what the American proposition is.
Yes, I
and
agree.
in an attention economy, they dominate the attention. And that's hard to deal with. It's not an easy thing to counteract. And the only thing I can think of is that we need to start being more forceful about our moral propositions. And
yeah, we need to make liberalism sexy again, right? We need to make the right and the left have turned the word liberal and the term liberal into a slur. Let me recount something. Let me read these super chats real quick, and then we'll get to it. $2 from Testicle Johnson to say the $2 Canadian dollars. I want to be clear to say the Constitution is mid. Okay, Canadian, right? We'll listen to you when we take you over and make you our 51st state. Okay. Old Scotty for $2 says, when saying left, clarify far left or Democrats. Okay, so what I mean when I'm talking about the left is I'm talking about the far left. Democrats are on the left, I guess, right? But I think I would see the Democrats and like the liberals as, again, I'm not talking, when I'm saying the left, I'm not meaning them. Does that make sense? I don't know what Ryan here means, but that's my clarity, right? I'm talking about the tankies, the socialists, the liberals, the post-liberals, blah, 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 right?
Well, as you know, I've been asking for clarity on that point for a few weeks now, mainly because I do want to know where the line is. Like, the thing that kind of triggered me on that was when Econoboy came out and was just like, I'm a socialist now. And everybody in that circle was like, all right, that's cool. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? What do you mean that's cool? Like, because my reaction to somebody saying I'm a socialist is that's outside the boundary. In the same way that someone saying I'm a Nazi is just outside the boundary, like, or I'm pro-slavery. It's like it's outside the boundary. It's not a position that gets to exist within the civil discourse without being met with derision and moral indignation. So I was concerned when that happened because I was like, wait, what is happening over there that I need to be aware of? Or what are we flirting with as the counter move to the counter move on the right?
Hold on, I gotta answer something real quick. 1 second. Okay, I'm just asking if I can. I'm asking someone if I can share a story. Okay, that I think is appropriate, but I don't want to share their story without their permission. So we'll see if they let me.
No
know.
doxing.
Well, it's not doxing, but it's not my story to tell, right? But it is. I think it's a useful indicator of where we are at. I will instead, while we wait for that, talk about something that I think that you would recognize because I like Econoboy. I think he's a good dude in general, right? My problem with what Econoboy was doing is the same problem I have with people that I talked to on Friday, right? I talked to this guy who was he called himself a radical civic nationalist. Nationalist is one of my outside the lines kind of guys too. Maybe not yours, but for me, a nationalist is someone who puts the state above all, okay? The state comes first, before you, before me, before our families, before our beliefs, before everything. Everything is in service to the state. And I talked to him, and during our conversation, he's like, well, I'm not actually a nationalist. I just use it to sound edgy and get people's attention. And it was apparent, like, he had some liberal beliefs, right? But he was flirting with little nationalist beliefs, but I wouldn't say he's a nationalist. I think that's a dangerous thing for people to do because it launders the term. It makes it more palatable to the public, and it should not be. So if someone says, I'm a socialist, or I'm a nationalist, or I'm a whatever, the reaction should be one of shock and aghast and disgust, frankly. But when you have people who are nice people who don't, like, who advocate for the soft version or whatever they want to call it, but it's not like actual socialism or actual nationalism, I still think they're doing harm. I still think that they're hurting the discourse because they're allowing people to say, well, look, I'm a socialist, but you like Econoboy, right? I'm just that, when they are absolutely not just that, right? Or when someone's like, yeah, I'm a nationalist, just like the Gusak guy. I think I may have gotten his name wrong, right? But forgive me. Like that guy, yeah, nationalists like that, when they're absolutely not like that. And this is the problem I'm having with a lot of people using these extremist labels and extremist terms. It's also the problem I have with people who have denigrated liberal as a term, because it's no longer sexy and people don't want to identify as liberal anymore. It's seen as verboten. It's seen as, oh, you're just gonna get made fun of all day, right? You're just a liberal, ha ha ha. And I want to fix that. I want to change that. How can we make, okay, Ryan, how can we make liberalism sexy again?
I mean, yeah, the first thing is not at all sexy, but it has to be done, which is we have to start calling people out on just using terms wrong. Like the fact that liberal got turned into a slur for anyone left of center is a great example of that. I republished, I put this up many years ago, but I republished on X today a short piece of writing, which is kind of like tongue in cheek, called "The Boy Who Cried Socialist," because the idea that you want more social programs does not make you a socialist. We're not talking about the means of production in that conversation, and there are many reasons to argue about whether too much of a welfare state is a good thing or not. That's a separate question. That's a policy conversation. But if you're not talking about mandating the means of production, and this is what I was telling Econoboy, when you say you are pro removing the right to property, you are pro removing the right to self-ownership. Those are natural rights, in my view. Those are things that are not granted to me by the state. To your point about nationalism being the highest, they come from beyond the state. They are the standard against which the state is measured. So it doesn't matter to me whether or not your utopian vision sounds good. When you say to me, oh, well, what if we got rid of the right to private property, but everyone was richer? Wouldn't that be better? My reaction to that is the same as if you said, what if we got rid of the right to freedom of speech or the right to freedom of religion and everyone was richer? It's a non-starter. I don't care what happens in your utopia. And that boundary needs to be drawn clearly, and the wordplay matters, right? And that's the attack, and that's the attack the right uses too. It's the exact mirror image, right? The left will come in and say, oh, come on, you can't take founders and their moral claims seriously. What about slavery? And the right's going to come in and say, oh, come on, you can't take American moral claims seriously. Look what happened with trans and polygamy, and let's talk about gay marriage. And there's obviously nothing moral here. And what they're ignoring there is that liberalism is it's a system of government. And because we've been a little tame about policing the boundaries, that's all it comes across as. And we come across, I think, in the classical liberal camp as infinitely permissive. We'll say like, oh, well, you're allowed to do it legally, so I have no opinion on that. It's like, no, that we don't need to be that tame. We actually can say we have views on what's moral and what's not moral. And we're just saying we don't think the government should enforce those views on you necessarily.
Yes. There was an article I read recently on a kind of a new publication, a new Substack. I'm not exactly sure. An e-magazine. What do the kids call it nowadays? I don't know. Anyway, it was called The Argument. Okay. And the article was about liberalism. The argument is meant to be a modern day defense of liberal values. And so I checked it out because I'm interested in defending liberal values. And so like, oh, let's see what they have to say. I really enjoyed their opening article. And the opening article basically talked about, I think the title was, and forgive me if I misquote it, but it's like, how can we live with each other? And I think that liberalism does ask that question, and I feel answers that question. But as a result, one of the failings of modern liberals is, as you said, just because we will tolerate you having dog shit opinions, dog shit views, etc., doesn't mean we don't think that they are dog shit. Okay? I think that freedom of speech should allow you to say all sorts of dog shit things, but I should still call them dog shit things. I just should not, I should just make sure that the government doesn't come in and fuck with you. And to an extent, I would extend it to culturally too. I don't think that people should be losing their jobs left and right for having dog shit opinions. There are obviously lines. It's nuanced, right? But in general, like, you shouldn't be fired from your job because you have very extreme views that you don't really discuss publicly, but maybe you made a couple tweets about it, etc. I think that principle of cultural free speech is important. I think that, yeah, and there's going to be arguments with liberals, within liberal circles, about what constitutes a take that should be verboten or should be seen as dog shit, to use a technical term, right? And I think we probably have disagreements on what those are. But I do get what you're saying when you mention that, yes, liberalism has to be more forceful, has to be more aggressive. We have to make a positive case for ourselves. We have rested on our laurels for too long because we are the foundation, and we just assumed that that's always safe, it's always in place, it's never going to be challenged. But it is being challenged. It is being challenged in a way that I worry that we aren't going to make it through.
Well, and to get to the sexy part, like, I think that we haven't been selling the story well. Like, part of that is when you say, okay, we are a nation that was founded on the premise of natural law. How should humans live together? We don't know the answer. We haven't discovered it yet. It's an ongoing quest to discover what natural law is. And it's a process that we are all engaged in together. That's what America is. We're trying to figure it out. And we're building on the foundation that we have. And that is an active civic process. It is a process that is enhanced by the fact that today I think we have too much federalization, but in theory, should have states that are very different from each other. And that's really useful because you and I can sit here like armchair philosophers arguing till the end of time about what the right rule for abortion is. But it's actually kind of helpful to say, well, Texas has this rule, Alabama has this rule, California has this rule, New York has this rule. We let the system run for 15 years. We've seen the results. Now we can have a conversation. And maybe you and I will never agree. And maybe that it's okay. And maybe there are certain things that we'll never agree on. And that's why states are different from each other. But that process is, I think, what we need to be selling, that we are actively engaged in attempting to learn how to do this together. But that doesn't mean that you get to come in on the fringes with the bullshit that we know doesn't work. Like, we know what theocracies are. They suck. We've seen them all over the world. It's awful. We know what socialism, communism is. I mean, how many times are you going to run the same goddamn failed experiment? Let's not do that again. So just, the fact that you're entitled to an opinion doesn't mean it's not dog shit. Oh, same thing with the flag burning. It's like people, it's like, on one hand, I had to come out and be like, yes, I am a lawyer. Yes, there are local ordinances you should be careful of, and subject to those, you do have the right to burn your own American flag. It's not a hard question. It's settled law. Also, don't fucking do that. Don't do that. It's gross, right? And I'm telling you the legal rule, and then I'm telling you my moral prescription. And those are different, and that's okay. Like, I think we should be engaged in those conversations.
So many people, though, conflate the two and say, well, I think my moral principles should become law. And it sounds good because they'll point to things like murders. Like, I think it's immoral to murder, don't you? Shouldn't we have a law on that? Isn't that a moral law? And to an extent, they're correct. But the problem with that is when you can't base a legal system on morality past a certain extent. I think that you have to set limits that recognize that no moral system is perfect. And this is what I think liberalism does very well, in my opinion, is that it allows for different moral systems, as long as they don't harm other people, to coexist. And what I mean by that, by harm other people, I mean deprive you of life, liberty, property, right? So while you may get very angry when you walk past a gay pride parade, okay, that may upset your calm, okay, that doesn't necessarily actually hurt you. It doesn't deprive you of anything, really. So
Well, and this is amongst the problems with having a state that's too expansive. Because once the state is involved in everything, then their fingers are in all the pies. So the moral creep is inevitable on some level, because all laws are on some level moral restrictions. Like that is what it is. There's a line there, I agree with you, but my line's not your line, and this politician's going to have a different line.
My line is not your line. That's
Yeah.
true. $2 real quick. $2 real quick from Old Scotty to say conservative justices declared Roe settled law. Thank you for the $2. Perhaps look. Can we talk about Roe v. Wade for a second? Just a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's perfect from what you were saying, but go ahead.
Yeah. I'm probably the most anti-abortion, pro-choice guy you'll ever meet, okay? I would never advise anyone to get an abortion. I would never participate in that. I think it's immoral in a real way. That said, I don't think the state should be dictating these things, because there are so many extraneous harms that come when you have the state try to set limits on these things past a certain point. And I think that we are going to see harms come from the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Now, do I think it was good law? No. And I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg agreed with me, right, that the law was kind of shaky and things. And I do think it should have been codified legislatively, but we didn't for a lot of reasons. And I think that this is kind of like where we see morality and legality kind of butt heads, and where I think that, okay, I don't want my moral system to be codified, because I think that would take away the rights of other people who may not agree with my moral system. Does that make sense?
It does. And if you view, as I do, like the American experiment as, let's call it, the quest for natural law, right? One of the reasons that originalism is so appealing to me, in fact, one of the primary reasons, is exactly what happened in Roe. When somebody comes to the court and they say, well, we think there should be a new right. We think, and what is a right? A right is a restriction on the democratic process. It's saying you can't vote for this. You can't vote for it in states. You can't vote for it federally. It is not a thing you are allowed to vote on as a democracy. We think there's a new right. We would like you, court, to pronounce a new right that didn't exist and wasn't ruled on by the people. That's very dangerous, because I don't think courts are well positioned to do that. I don't think we want 9 justices making those calls. I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg was right. The messy process of trying to get a law passed, trying to get 50 laws passed in 50 states, is where we learn how to live and how to live with each other and what works. 9 justices making a pronouncement is the worst possible way to do that.
But that's what's happening now with a lot of Trump stuff, you understand, right? Like, they are the problem. Part of my problem with Trump, okay, is this executive order, rule by executive order that he's doing. Because while, yes, you're right, we shouldn't have 9 people going around pronouncing things, we shouldn't have 1 either. And it does feel like he's simply just, I'm making an executive order, I'm legally allowed to do it, right? And technically he is. But it feels very fundamentally anti-American, frankly.
Well, the executive and the court are not situated in the same way. Like, the reason why the court is such a bad body to make pronouncements about the feelings of Americans is because they are selected and given lifetime tenures for the express purpose of not being sensitive to democracy. They're there to not experience political pressure.
Mhm.
That's their role. They're there to do legal reasoning. The president can get voted in, can get voted out, can be impeached. Like, the president actually is supposed to be responsive to the will of the people.
Supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, so the question then isn't, is the president the will, the representative of the people? He obviously is. That's what the president is. The question is, what powers should the president have? And I think one thing that we are overdue for as a nation is a conversation about how powerful the executive branch has become, because it's been a one-way ratchet. Like, I came to political age, like I was a freshman in New York on 9/11. So that was my first week in the city, 9/11. And there was, ever since that day, a one-way ratchet of the executive branch just getting more and more and more and more and more powerful. And I know when I was kind of like a card-carrying lefty, I loved it when Obama used the power of the executive in creative ways to get things done that I wanted done, because it was my guy. But then that should give you pause when the next president, who's not your guy, picks up those tools and runs even further.
And they have been doing it, right?
Oh
I will agree
endlessly.
with you. I will agree with you that both sides are guilty of this. Every time a new executive comes to power, the first thing they do is start abusing their power, in my opinion. I don't think that they should have these overarching rights. Again, for the reason I laid out, and I think the reason you hinted at, and I understand that you think that the courts and the executive are in a different place, and they are, but I am simply saying that the reason we have a Congress is because while we do have the executive branch is representative, I would argue that the Congress allows for more nuanced representation, for more kind of granular representation. And because a lot of people will vote for the executive while not liking a lot of what the executive has to offer. I know I held my nose. I've held my nose, and I voted for Kamala. I didn't like a lot of what she had to offer, but I just thought she was better than Trump, and I stand by that. I'm assuming, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm assuming many voted for Trump in the same way. And so when they are using this executive order in order to bypass Congress and the Senate, I think that it is harmful to our nation's structure. I think it's harmful to our nation's cohesiveness in a very real way.
But when I say that I'm like a limited government federalist, like I would prefer the federal government be smaller, this is why. Our system is designed for Congress to gridlock. We are the country that is the hardest to pass a law in of any democracy of which I'm aware. It is incredibly hard to pass a law. You need bicameralism, presentment. This is not how it works in most countries. And what that does is it makes it very hard for the federal government to act. And the presumption is that's okay because the states are doing most of the lifting.
Yeah, the states are this. Look, gang, if you're listening, your local government are going to have much more, or should have, I don't know about nowadays, but most of my life, your local government is going to have much more of an effect on your daily life than the federal government will. And it's just true.
But what we did is we nationalized everything. And even on the right, by the way, like in the Newt Gingrich era, when they were focusing on local politics, they were focusing on local politics to win national politics. So even then, it was still focusing on national. And the idea has become that everything's a national political issue. But Congress can't actually respond like that. They get gridlocked, so they delegate powers to the executive because he's not gridlocked. And then the executive has all these new powers and uses them. And when it's your guy, you love it. And when it's not, you don't. But that's the problem. The problem is that we've made all these issues national. Congress can't. Structurally, they just can't operate on that level. So they have to delegate it to the executive. And that becomes a never-ending cycle of executive power.
Let's talk about the executive power for a little bit, because one of the big things with the recent tariff ruling, right? I don't know if you read it.
It's long. I've read parts of it, but
yes.
I'm getting up to speed.
But I think that the question becomes, should the president, what restrictions on declaring an emergency should be put in place for the president? Should the president simply be able to announce there's an emergency and then bypass a bunch of restrictions that were put in place with a kind of like a loophole, for lack of a better term, that says, well, in an emergency, though, you can, but outside of an emergency, you can't, but in a state of emergency, you absolutely can. I think that because that's the loophole, as I understand it, that Trump is using to put all these tariffs everywhere and to fuck with the trade. He's like, we're in a state of emergency. And I would just ask the Republicans in my audience and the right-leaning people in my audience, is this a power that you want the executive to be able to have? Because I promise you, if you do put this as a power that the president is able to have, the next Democrat that comes into office is going to declare climate change emergencies everywhere for everything and will just be able to bypass all the blocks that we seem to have in place. It's not something I want, and it shouldn't be something you want. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
So I was just looking it up. As of July 2025, 90 emergencies have been declared since 1976, when the National Emergencies Act was implemented. 42 have expired, 48 are continuing. We have 48 national emergencies today. And this is not all Trump. This is every administration since that law was passed.
I'm curious how many Trump specifically has had, or yeah, is there a granular breakdown? I don't know, out of the curiosity.
Let's see. Trump has, according to Wikipedia, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Looks like
8 of the 48. You said?
Oh, well, no, but 10 if you count, or more if you count Trump term 1. That's just Trump 2.
Damn.
But this is not unique to Trump. I mean, it looks like Biden had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that are current. And the thing that's hilarious about it, by the way, is that Trump 1 declared the southern border an emergency, right? Under Biden, the numbers got worse, but it was no longer an emergency. And then under Trump, it is still an emergency, even though the numbers are way better. Because the thing about emergency laws is that there is really no way for courts to police that. Because if you ask yourself, which branch is best suited to decide whether there is an emergency, which part of the government do you want making that call? It is actually the president. Like, if we're being invaded and it's an emergency, you want him responding, right?
Yeah,
like
you don't want Congress to bicker over it. I get the principle at play.
That's what it's for.
I'm just saying, in practice, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem.
Yeah, okay? I think the answer is what the court did with the tariffs is they didn't touch whether it was an emergency, because there isn't really sound ground for a court to get in there and second guess the president. And for reasons you could imagine, like could you imagine if we were being invaded and then somebody ran to court and was like, I need an injunction. You can't use the military. That's not really an emergency. This is something a court should decide. It's kind of preposterous. Like, the president is there for the reason we have an executive branch on some level is to deal with emergencies. So what the court did is it went through and it said, is tariffs really a power that was delegated by this law? Because it says you can regulate imports. Does regulate imports mean tariffs? And they went down that road, which I think is a better approach.
Can I just challenge you maybe a little bit on this? Because I agree with you 80%, 70% of the way on the court shouldn't be delving into what is and is not an emergency. And I think you make a compelling argument. But I wonder, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm at a disadvantage here, but I wonder, is there not if it can be demonstrated to a reasonable degree by a reasonable person that there is no actual emergency in this declared emergency, I do think that the court should be able to step in and say, we all know you're lying, buddy. We just know that you're making this shit up. It's obvious to everyone. I don't know. Again, I don't know the legalese about that. Like, you would be much more in a position to talk about that. But it seems to me, just on a reasonable level, that we should be able to look at that. There's not an emergency here. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, we can all imagine cases where it's clear it is an emergency, and we can all imagine cases where reasonable people might disagree on whether it's an emergency. But can we not imagine cases, and shouldn't there be a way to set up a system of tests, maybe, like we do for free speech, like we do for everything, like the Brandenburg test, like a system of tests that the courts can go through and say, well, is the president being honest here about what this is an emergency? I don't know what those tests should be or what they should look like, but it seems to me that they should be able to craft a system, right?
I think we're starting to see the development of law that could lead in that direction, but not with the kind of law we have on the books. We would have to actually pass new laws. And here's what I mean. If you look at the laws that just say, if there's an invasion, like the Alien Enemies Act, right? Or a potential invasion, doesn't have to be even a real invasion. Or if there's an emergency, that doesn't give courts much to work with. Like, there's no real standard there. There's no case law to look at. There's nothing in our common law about courts telling, King Richard, no, that's not really an emergency. There just isn't a legal tradition to hook into, and the law doesn't give the court much to work with. But if you look at what the Ninth Circuit did when they were evaluating Trump's use of National Guard in California, one of the hooks there was, if the federal government is unable to enforce federal law, then you can use the National Guard. That's not an emergency. That's a much more articulated standard. And with a standard like that, the court was able to look at it and say, like, well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean you get interfered with once. Like, 99% effectiveness couldn't be the standard, but it also doesn't mean zero. Like, just because you can enforce it every once in a while doesn't mean you're not being prevented from enforcing it. And we can use that standard and come up with a legal test that we think could stand the weight of scrutiny and might go to the Supreme Court and be okay. And I think if we started getting rid of some of our old emergency laws and passing laws that were more modern, and had more modern legal language and had more articulated standards like that, which would be a lot of work and would require a functioning Congress, then you would start, this would be how you fix the problems. I don't know that we can expect the courts to rescue us, because I don't think courts are going to be comfortable going out there and saying, no, the president's wrong, there's no emergency.
It's fraught. It's fraught. I think I'm 70% with you on this, that there are problems with the courts making these declarations and decisions, and something that should be the purview of the executive. But I do think it's clear that it's not working, and we need new laws regarding the emergency powers. But the problem with that, and this is the incentive structures at play, no one wants to get rid of them. They want to use them themselves. They want to use them themselves. They don't want to get rid of this thing. They want to say, well, the enemy's doing it. It's pretty effective. Let's do it too. And this is kind of the race to the bottom that we are seeing play out. And I know a lot of people hate on me for saying that both sides do this, but they do. I fundamentally disagree with you that the left does it to the near the extent the right does. Right is like at a power level way over the Democrats and how they're exercising these things, right? But I will look. I'm getting sidetracked, but I think it's important. I think that a lot of the people are mistaking the left for Democrats. And they are looking at what people on the left are declaring, the Taylor Lorenzes and all those people, right? The Hassans are saying they want to do, and they're assuming that's what Democrats want to do. And I don't think they're the same. I think that the left is at war with the Democrats right now, and vice versa. I think that the Democrats and the left are fighting an existential battle. The left is trying to coup. That's the term I think Destiny uses. I don't use that term. I like the term parasites. They're trying to infect the Democratic Party. And that struggle and how that plays out is going to, I guess, it's gonna decide the future of our country, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think I posted this in response to one of Destiny's tweets recently, where I was saying, I wish we had four parties. I wish we had, the socialists, communists, the Democrats, the Republicans, and the monarchists. And, then everyone could be in their box and we could know who's who. And when the socialists and monarchists poll at 2%, we'll know that too, right? So I think there is a fight happening. I don't think it's a majority. I think it is a vocal minority. But one thing that Trump did, which is unique in modern politics, is he got the fringe on his party's side to vote. Like, you can imagine if somebody could get the socialist left to vote, they'd be incredibly powerful, right? He did that for the right.
Well, I don't know about incredibly powerful, right? Let's not there's not a lot of them, okay?
But it's enough.
It is enough because we're deciding on the margins, right? In modern politics.
I don't think that power can be passed on. And this is just me spitballing, but I think when Trump's no longer in the political picture personally, I don't know that the dissident right keeps voting. I think they might slowly stop voting the way that they weren't voting prior.
Well, they're not going to support JD Vance. They're not. You see them going to war with him right now.
He's not white enough yet, right? So I mean, that's what I mean. I think the dissident right, like the socialist left, tends to just implode when they no longer have their inspirational leader on the exact center stage. And that's what we saw in the midterms with Trump, where if he's not on the ticket, they're not voting.
We'll see. How do you... Oh, go ahead, please.
I will say, I don't know when the next moment's going to come to fix this problem. I thought we had one. As you can imagine, given my politics, I really was holding my nose when I voted for Biden. I did not love that vote. In fact, I promised myself it was the last time I was going to hold my nose to that extent and cast a vote. And the reason I did it was that Trump is the case study for executive overreach. We all know this. We saw him in 2016. And then Biden, I thought, ran as the once-in-a-generation moment where you have a lame duck president who actually would have the incentives to undo some of the levers of power because he knows he's only one term. That's what I thought was happening. So you can imagine my surprise when it went totally the opposite way. And now we've got...
Did not happen like that.
Oh, no, it did not. He actually, if anything, widened executive power as much as anybody.
Like I said, every president that comes in has that incentive on the table. It's like giving someone huge amounts of power to enact what they think is righteous and what they think they were elected for and asking them to not use it. It's incredibly hard to say no to. And we sit here with our principles in our armchairs, but we don't have that access to that power. And I would hope I would be principled enough to say no. But would I? That's a question, right? That's a question. If I could say, if I am given a lever and they say, well, yes, it would bypass and bypass a lot of the constitutional protections, all these things, if I pull this lever, but also you'll get what you want. You'll get that policy that you've always wanted, right? That you think will make the world a better place. You're going to get it. Just pull the lever. It's okay, right? Everyone's doing it. Like Trump did it. Biden did it. Obama did it. Bush did it. You can do it too. It's okay. I think it would be incredibly tempting.
It's very, very tough. And it's tougher now because we're in this weird era where everybody thinks that they must be able to have a say in how people who live across the country from them live. There's a sense today where it's like, oh, they let trans people in bathrooms in California. That's a personal issue for me in Ohio. They let people,
that's crazy.
They have abortion restrictions in Texas. That really someone asked me, because I have daughters, they said well, after Roe got overturned, aren't you worried for your daughters? And I was like, I live in a blue state. The law didn't even change. Nothing changed because it is a regional issue now, and the laws where I live are incredibly permissive. the idea that you need to tell people who live in a different state from you how to live is what makes the lever so tempting, right? Because then once you get in power, it's like, well, now it's my turn. I get to screw over the other scene.
everyone wants to do it, and everyone and it works the opposite way too, right? Like for endorsements and things, the insistence that every Democrat everywhere, even in California and Montana or wherever, endorse the New York City mayor. What? I don't give a shit. I don't get a vote in that, right? I don't get a decision. It's not my city. It's not my choice. And I wish more people had that view that I don't give a shit, right? What they do in fucking Texas, that's their problem, not my problem. But everyone wants to make it a problem because if I can point to, like, look at all the bad things that are going on in this state, don't you want to stop it? Vote for me for comptroller of a city that's 1,000 miles away. What are you doing, man? But when it comes to federal elections, though, I think that we have a better case because I think that you could look at Trump and his success electorally, at least his last election, even though I argue he barely won. And I think I'm right on this. He barely won. It was a 3 states, 1.5% vote in 3 states. If that had switched, we would be looking at President-elect Kamala Harris right now. I think that he and the Republicans have successfully nationalized everything. Everything.
Well, it's tricky.
Look how much they talk about.
I don't
California.
know. I don't know who did it first. I just know that they're both doing it. Because if you think about like the abortion issue, that's always going to be nationalizing in my mind when it's a local concern. But you get the same thing on the right. I'm not going to argue with you about that. I think that like right now we're in an area where everyone's nationalizing everything. And every issue, no matter how local and how personal, is being litigated on the national political stage where it doesn't make any sense. And it's because it's not particularly sexy for a politician to say, I think that would be better left to communities and states and families to decide. But that is actually the right answer most of the time.
And when they have said that, and like Pete Buttigieg said that basically, I think the communities on the trans issue, right? Trans in sports, I believe he was talking about. He's like, I think each community should decide that for themselves, right? Let them have that decision. The left ate him alive for like throwing trans people under the bus. That's not what he was doing. He was simply saying communities should be able to decide this issue, right?
Yeah, and that one of the things about the left that's particularly unforgiving is exactly what you just described there. Like, I mean, Trump came out and said the exact same thing about abortion, and that's apparently fine, because he's resisted the call for a national abortion ban.
A lot of the right went after him for that.
They did, but not enough. I mean, maybe he's just a more popular figure.
Well, hold on. The right has an advantage in that they'll go lockstep way more than the left will, in my opinion. Right? The right, they will have their misgivings, but they will like, well, he's our guy. We're gonna support him. We're gonna line up behind him. We're gonna pull that lever for him because he's not a Democrat. And he is our guy. And I think the Democrats don't do that to the same extent. I think that they were like, well, if we can't have our exact way, we're just not going to vote at all. And I think there's this asymmetry here.
There's definitely an asymmetry. Nobody likes it when I make this point. Like I think every time I make this point online, I get some kind of crazy ratio in terms of how it's received. But there is absolutely an asymmetry. Stuff that works on the right does not work on the left, and vice versa. Like I think that when the left wins, it's because they have an inspirational, common sensey Clinton, Obama type figure who can unite disparate interests and make a big tent feel sexy and feel practical and feel like there's a common goal and feel like everyone's marching together. And I think that actually works on the left. Yeah. On the right, I think that the right is more cohesive as a base by nature. And I think that, some of what Trump has figured out is that when you get into a rolling in the mud, rally your base contest, he has a structural advantage. It just works better for him. That might not be true post-Trump, but in the Trump era, I think that sort of fight
I do wonder if that hurts them long-term, the Republicans long-term, because as you said, and I I'm not sure I agree. I'd have to think about it more, but I'm not sure I disagree. That Trump has a pull about him that makes the fringe vote in a way that other Republican candidates won't. I don't. Again, I'd have to think about more if that's true or not. But assuming it is, I think that like him relying on that and Republicans relying on that to barely win means that when that goes away, they're gonna have a lot of ground to make up. A lot of ground to make up. That said, there are warning signs for Democrats coming up too. Registration differences are pretty apparent, right? There's just different data points we can point to right now to give each side hope and each side something to fear. I do worry when my side tends to look at like special elections and how they go wildly for the Democrats and then assume that it's going to carry on into general elections, into on-year elections and things like that. I don't know if it necessarily will. I think it's going to be there's different dynamics here. And so I don't want people to get complacent and look at like huge swings that we saw. What was the most recent one? It was in a red district, but it swung like 20, 30 points Democrat for their special election. It was just like last week, maybe the week before. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. I can't quite remember where it was, though.
I'm blanking on it, right? But a lot of people were promoting that. It's like, see, the Democrats are winning. And not to rain on anyone's parade, but you cannot use that as a data point, right? You cannot use that to say anything broadly about the electorate right now. Hopefully, right, it'll translate to the general election, but I don't know if that's necessarily true. Let me read some of these super chats. $5 from Old Scotty to say separation of school and religion was almost lost in a 4-4 decision because Barrett recused. If she had not, private schools would be receiving public money. Thank you for the $5. $20 from Grassroots Hegemon to say conservatives win, Republicans barely win. Thank you for the $20.
I mean, I think, kind of melding the topics here, what I would like to see in a post-Trump world, assuming that the hypothesis that his particular magnetism isn't transferable is true.
Oh, do you think he's sick? By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like there's have you seen the whole Trump hasn't been in public for a few days and therefore he's dying?
Yeah, I don't think I have reason to believe he's dying, but I mean, he's old and he's not particularly slim. So the idea that he has vein problems and circulation problems strikes me as it would be implausible that he didn't. So yeah, I think there's certainly a risk that he has health condition problems. I mean, he's a man of a certain age.
I look, I think it's conspiratorial thinking, okay? But it is worth wondering what happens if he does die in office. Right? What does that look like for our nation? What does that look like for the Republican Party? What does that look like for this administration? Obviously, we know who's going to be vice president. It'll be who's going to be the new president. It'll be J.D. Vance. That's just written in the Constitution. We know how that will play out. But like, will he be able to get anything done, or will he spend the whole time fighting for control? Right? In this new world, right? This post-Trump world. It's just interesting to think about.
It will be interesting. I don't know if you watched his interviews down the stretch of the presidential election, like when he was on Rogan and Theo Vaughn. And
I watched a couple, not a ton, right? But
he's a political talent. He's very good. He's going to appeal to a lot of people. So I think that he's going to be in a strong position if something like that happened. The question is, what does that mean? And then we're just guessing, right? Like, I think that there will be a fight, though, on the right. Like, are the gropers still voting at that point? And I do think that would be the moment for somebody, left or right, somebody to come out and say, actually, no, it's time to pivot and we're going to actually start talking about how we opened the show. Like, this is the American propositional set of values. This is what they are. This is why I think my party is better equipped to deliver on them.
I think Democrats should. Like, I think Democrats should be the ones to do this because, well, I've seen you ask the question, like, what do Democrats stand for, right? And there is a current intra-party fight about that. I think now is the time for liberals within the Democratic Party, and I think we are far more than the leftists, right? To stand up and said, okay, this is what we're offering, a return to our foundational principles that we have in the Declaration of Independence. And I think the nation is hungry for that, right? We're tired. We're tired of the fringes calling all the shots and being the loudest voice in the room. So we just need to tell them to no, there's more of us than there are of you. We are louder, we are stronger, and we are right and you're not. And we're going to sell that to the American people. All this MAGA extremism, we reject that. All this leftist extremism, we reject that. We're going to bring back normal to America, make America normal again. And I think
that's a hell of a sales pitch. That's a hell of a sales pitch.
That's what we need to do. And I worry that we're not going to, because we have to fight with people like Taylor Lorenz, who there's dark money that's coming in, and making all these kind of assertions with no evidence. I don't know. I don't mean to go on a rant. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see that come from the left. I'd love to see that come from the right. I'd love to see it come from anybody, to be totally honest with you. And I think it is a compelling sales pitch. It should win. And I think the Trump era is going to be unique. And I think that once we're post-Trump, there could be a pivot, and now's the time to do it. And it's going to be a little bit I know you and I talked about Doge, and I really wanted it to work, even though I suspected it wouldn't, and it didn't work. And the reason I wanted it to work is that our deficit is a major problem, and it seemed like a once-in-a-generation opportunity, even though it was squandered. When Biden took office, I thought that was a once-in-a-generation opportunity to restrain executive power, even though it was squandered. This might be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to pivot from catering to the extremes to catering towards the core American propositional values. Will we squander it? I don't know. We're not batting a good average right now, but we've got to win one of these eventually.
This is why I'm worried about the Heritage American stuff, because that's not normal, and they're propositioning it. They're trying to sell it as if it was normal. We've always been a nation of people. That this is their line, and it's very insidious. They're we're not an economic zone. We're a people. We're a bloodline. And America's never been that.
No, I mean, it has never been that. And I think that there is no historic argument for that bears any scrutiny. I think that what they'll look at is they'll look at lines like "we the people" and say that is what gives them the hook into this kind of ahistoric rhetoric. But if you actually read the Declaration of Independence, it talks about all men being created equal. It talks about all men having natural rights, among them being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It talks about the fact that the government must derive its power from the consent of the governed. So yes, we the people said something. That doesn't mean we the ethno-state. There's no reading of that. Now, did the founders happen to be majority European? Absolutely. But look, my family's Irish and Norwegian. We were not over here on the Mayflower. The idea that is somehow excluded is laughable, particularly because if you go back in our history, the Irish were second-class citizens and were degraded and were looked down upon for a long time.
Yeah, America has not lived up, in many cases, to its initial values. No. And then we can all point to periods in history where that was the case, slavery being the most famously.
It's messy. It's messy, but that's okay. That's the process. We're trying to figure out what it means to be a nation that abides by natural law. We don't have all the answers. We're doing the best we can, and we're moving in that direction. And that is an important story. And this idea that we would just suddenly become an ethno-state, or even more weirdly, a religious state, it just seems completely contrary to any founding document you could reference. I don't even know what they'd be looking at.
This is a problem. With this argumentation and this line of argumentation, they don't give a shit what the founding documents say. They're well, we want this, and we're going to make an argument that it'll make everyone's lives better. And by everyone, we mean the people we consider people, which are heritage Americans and Christians. And not all Christians, just the Christians that happen to agree with us. So our specific brand of Christianity. Um, I don't know. It's just like this is a problem we have is we are fighting people who do not care about a lot of things, facts being one of them, but also the history of the nation being another. And they just, it's all strongman theory, and it's so frustrating.
And this is where I think the right had a point when people were like when people were tearing down statues of Jefferson. Like this is a problem because in order to like the American proposition is very fragile. It's not like an intuitive thing. You have to teach it. You have to teach people that it's valuable. You have to teach people that it's a noble pursuit. And you have to teach people that it's a moral claim that we are obligated to live up to. And that isn't something that happens by itself. And there's a thing that happened. I don't know if you had this experience, but for me, like, when I was in like edgy and in, college and 9/11 had just happened. And it was like it was very cool to be patriotic for like 6 months. And then it was very cool to be very anti-American after that. Everybody in university was like, oh my God,
Look,
didn't we deserve it?
That's always, that's always been the case, though. It's always been like the colleges, being a teenager and a young 20s guy, it's always been cool to be counterculture. And yeah, it's just that's always been with us. And you're right, though, that there was a time where like you were like, oh, America sucks. Yeah, we're gonna fight the system, bro. But most people grow out of that shit.
Well, but then imagine if your college professors are like, yes, America does suck. Yeah, so that's the issue that I think the right correctly pointed at. I think their remedies are not the right remedies. But the issue they're pointing at is a fair one, which is that there is this cultural undercurrent that was all about how terrible America is, that emanated primarily from the left. And now people kind of believe it. And now you're seeing it emanate from the right. America's terrible. So now we got it in stereo. People saying America's so bad, we reject the proposition. And the proposition has to be defended.
And speaking of that liberalism, right? And I'm going to go back to the story because I just got a permission to share this story. They just DM'd me and said I could share the story, so I'm going to, because I think it bears on the topic of today and threats to liberalism and threats to America and things like that. And I really want the people who are listening to me, who are Democrats and on the left, to hear me here. Because I think that this, for the most part, I agree that MAGA, Trump are the greater threat. But there is a specific line and a specific avenue which I do think that the far left poses a threat in a way that MAGA doesn't. So a friend of mine got a hit tweet recently about why they are a liberal, and they gave forth their arguments, pretty tame stuff, about why they are a liberal, why they consider themselves to be a liberal. And it blew up for them, right? Got like over 1,000 likes, all that, and a bunch of views. And suddenly, from the left, they got 30 new DMs in a day, right? Basically just hounding her. There were attempts to hack her account. There were attempts to tear her down because she had the gall to say that capitalism was good, liberalism was based, people's rights should be protected, no matter if they're LGBT or white, hetero, etc. They should all be protected. Just an anodyne tweet. But the left went after them in a way that the right didn't when she's had hit tweets about like MAGA and the free speech and how they don't coincide, right? That they're against each other. I do think that online specifically, the far left is a cancer that will... I am more afraid of the far left online than I am of some dumbass MAGA guy online. Outside of the online, yes, I think that MAGA is a greater threat. They're the ones in power. They're the ones calling the shots. They're the ones that are tearing up our Constitution right now. They're the ones that are tearing up our norms. But online specifically, the far left will do things to you at a greater rate than, at least in my experience, than MAGA will. I've never gotten more hate than on the Russia-Ukraine issue. That's been, out of all the things, Israel, Palestine, and Russia, Ukraine is where I get the most death threats. And it ain't from the right.
Yeah, there's a dangerous, I think, sense on the left sometimes that they kind of like armchaired philosophied their way into a moral claim that is so superior to anything else that anything they do is justified. It's the meme, right? Where it's like, I can punch a baby because it brings awareness to Palestine. It's, like there's a sense that their cause is the only one that matters. And as a result, anything they do is justified. I was thinking about this actually when I was watching, I don't know if everyone on the channel watched, but the debate with Gibbs and Bentham that you had recently.
It was a good debate.
It was fun. And at
Bentham,
one point,
though, look, can I just say, I think Bentham was right. He had the correct arguments, but he just was not prepared for the format, I think.
It's a clash of styles, let's call it that. But at one point, Bentham made the point where he was saying, well, don't you think it's good to save 14 million lives? Don't you think that's good? And I wanted Gibbs, because he hadn't seen it, but I wanted Gibbs to be like, well, wouldn't it be better to save 80 million shrimp lives? Like, what are we talking about, right? Like, you have to, like, if you don't agree on a moral center, a moral axiom, then what's good never makes any sense because it's all downstream of that. And when you have people, and the people I think that you're talking about with these death threats fall in this cap, who reject the American moral proposition, we're not going to be able to agree on anything else. Like, everything is downstream of that.
Yes.
If you think it's okay to issue someone death threats because of their speech, you don't get what this country is. You're off the team. I don't know how else to put it. And that has to be policed. And it has to be policed vigorously. And maybe the left needs some Sister Souljah moments, and maybe the right's going to need to have whatever the equivalent is, where you can start saying, no, that's a fundamentally un-American thing to do. And if that's who you are, we don't want your support. Fuck off. We're done. Like, there has to be a guardrail around our core values. Otherwise, they're just going to be at the mercy of these predatory forces and their endless word games and attempts to turn things into their own moral system, where it's like, no, we actually have to have some center as a country.
Yeah, and you can't ever, please, dear audience, never let them gaslight you into thinking they're the majority. They're not. The Heritage Americans, not the majority of this country. The far left, not the majority of this country. They just aren't. They don't have the numbers. That's why they have to attack the Democrats in the case of the far left, or the Republicans in the case of the far right, because their ideas can't win on their own. They need to parasite. They need to latch on to another system that can, and then try to infest it and infect it and change it from within. And you have to just not let them do that. If I may, for a moment, speak on the chorus issue. I don't know how familiar you are with that, and we don't have too much time to go, so I'll be quick. One of the problems with the far left is that they will basically repeat ad nauseum a lie. The lie being that Chorus, this group, this organization, forbade its members from talking about Gaza and Palestine. That was the claim made, that they are not allowed to talk about Gaza and to denigrate the DNC, right? There has since been a number of debunkings of this where they show Chorus members who are being paid talking about Gaza, denigrating the DNC, doing all the things that the people who on the left claim that they're not able to do. But even when you show them this, information and say, actually, look, this is one of the Chorus members talking about the evil Zionists in the DNC who are ignoring Palestine and Gaza, right? They'll say, well, that's just one person. They just did it as a token, right? They'll just make up these excuses to ignore reality because it doesn't conform with their worldview. And this is, in the span of 3 days, or maybe a little longer, a few people with the audience totaling in the millions has created out of nothing this new reality that leftists are going to push until the sun goes out. How do we combat that? I don't know. The only thing I can think of is we just need to get rid of these people. And I'm not talking like, oh, look, okay. No, not like that. I'm talking about politically. Get rid of them. They are not welcome. Do not listen to them. Do not give them a seat at the table at all. They have demonstrated that they are your enemy. Don't let them in the house. I don't know.
No, they can't be trusted. I totally agree with you. And I think that this is another asymmetry because there's been similar, in fact, worse allegations and scandals on the right in terms of people getting paid. And it didn't really matter very much in the long term. And part of the reason is when Citizens United was decided, everyone on the right was happy with it. Everyone on the left was upset about it. So on the left, the phrase dark money has some kind of magic power associated with it. But in reality, the idea that people are politically motivated and they'd like to support people who have the same views that they do and get that into the media makes total sense. It's not at all weird.
What does dark money even mean? Like a super chat is dark money, technically, because I don't know the funding of the super chat.
A super chat is, of course, dark money.
Yes.
But like, if somebody, for example, if somebody was like, oh man, I really like Wick, I want to give him a super chat. But you know what? I can't really afford to drop a $20 super chat myself every night. Maybe me and a few friends will come together, we'll pool our resources, we'll make a little organization, and now we're going to give him a super chat. Is that suddenly some kind of nefarious thing because there's a few people who want to give you a super chat? It's an overblown concern that's downstream of the phrase dark money having magical significance. But in reality, I think it's voodoo. I don't think it's actually defined in any useful way. I don't know what it's supposed to mean. I just know that on the left,
it's kept vague as purpose.
To reject dark money.
Yeah,
it's a sign and symbol.
It's kept vague on purpose so that they can look at someone they don't like, that they don't have really any attack against, and make up an attack against them and claim that the funding that they are getting is dark money, right? Because again, dark money is a meaningless term. Like people say, it's money you don't know the source of. And everyone who pays me a super chat, I don't know their jobs. Do I know if they're working for the government? No. Do I check? Why would I? Right? Why does anyone? And again, who's cashing their checks? Who's super chatting the super chatters, as I said it kind of ironically, right? But this transparency demand that a lot of these people on the left only flows one way, right? They want you to release your bank statements, right? But they'll never do it themselves. Again, it's this demand for transparency. This is needless. Look, I do think there should be rules around foreign government funding, right? Like, so if you are getting money from a foreign agent, that should have to be disclosed and declared. And to be frank, I think that you should have to tell people when you are getting paid, right, by an organization. I think that's a fair thing. But as I understand it, a lot of these chorus people did say that they were being paid, right? And things like that. They said that they were working for him, but because
I think that's a totally fair norm. I don't think it's not a law, but as a norm, wear your jersey. If you're coming out there and you're playing partisan politics and you're supported by partisan organizations, you should tell people that. It's not. I know. I was talking to Connor recently, and I know that's something that gets thrown in his face sometimes, but he's, to my knowledge, been totally transparent about it. So we get what it is. And if you're watching Fox News or you're watching MSNBC, that's not a different arrangement. They're being paid to have political views there too. That is kind of how media has always worked. So it's not particularly surprising. I guess maybe people had some kind of view that independent media was going to be immune to the forces that impacted all of society previously. That sounds crazy to me, but maybe they did.
I think that I think that organizations such as Chorus and other things that pay a stipend to their content creators that they like and want to promote actually does make them more free to speak what they really think on issues, because they're no longer beholden to their audience, which makes no bones about telling them. And I've gotten I've had chatters tell me directly, I'm not going to super chat you if you have this person on. I'm not going to give you money if you say this kind of thing, right? They'll just out and say it, right? And that's their right to do and things like that. But having a stipend from an organization that likes what you do and wants you to do it more frees you from the audience capture that is a pervasive problem, especially, well, I won't even say especially. It's on the left and the right. I see there are plenty of people in the MAGA space or in the right who can't really say anything bad about Trump. I know a creator, right, who is definitely not MAGA, right, and who spoke out about MAGA, but they were seen on the right, and they've been a bigger creator, a bigger channel for years, right? And their audience is dying because their audience is fleeing from them because they won't toe the party line on Trump. And again, that's a right for them. It's the right of any audience member to do, but let's not act as if that's not a bigger influence than a corporation or something. It's absolutely a bigger influence. People do this and make these decisions all the time on what they're going to cover and how they're going to cover it based on how they think their audience is going to accept and react to it. One of the reasons I've had just real quick, one of the reasons I've had problems growing is because I'm always fighting with my audience because I keep saying things that they don't like, so they leave, right?
Yeah, no, that's why it's easier to do video games and not have to open your mouth about controversial topics on some level. I think that where there is a germ of truth here, and like all these stories that get ginned up, there's always a germ of truth, and then there's the magnified nonsense. The germ of truth is if you were, or not you, if anyone was a creator who was touting their independence and did actually have an obligation to toe the party line or say certain things, that would be credibility damaging. That is a big deal.
True.
And I think that that's how the best lies spread, right? Is that there is a germ of truth there. You know, like with Christian
But the transparency of the money isn't the problem there. The problem is the transparency of the strings attached to that money.
Yeah. And if someone in my example was saying, no, I'm independent to the bone, right? But I mean, that's I think that's the norm we can have, is like, you should ask streamers. You know, that's a fair question. Like, are you taking money? That's a fair question to put in chat. Ask them. If they lie, that is then worth knowing. But you know, I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing for a streamer to take money. I think that it's a new information ecosystem. People are going to show up. Like, that's how that works.
If I wanted to influence a streamer, okay, and let's say I was a rich dude, okay, one day maybe, right? I was making millions and millions of dollars, and I wanted people to talk a certain way on a certain issue. And I was like, you know what? There's this Ryan Mullally guy, and I think he has he's a big audience, and I think that if he were to be more pro-Wick, it would help me. You know what I would do? I would get a lot of bot accounts, a lot of alt accounts, and every time you talked positively about Wick, I'd super chat you a lot. I'd have all these bot accounts give you 10, 20, 50, $100 saying, wow, you're so great. I agree 100%. Wow, that's so awesome. And then when you talk negatively about Wick, I'd just stop doing that. And you would naturally, because you're not dumb, see the correlation like, oh, hey, look, when I talk about Wick positively, I make a lot of money. I get a lot of views. I get a lot of good attention. When I don't talk about him or I talk negatively about him, I don't. And you will naturally, through this incentive structure, begin to be more pro-Wick. And I can do that. It's totally legal. Nothing's wrong. Like, it's undetectable because no one checks who their super chats are from. No one. Not a single goddamn soul. Okay? Like, the only time I've ever checked a super chat is when Lex Friedman used to donate to me, and I was like, is that really Lex Friedman? And I did check, and it was. But like in the normal course of things, if like Grassroots Hegemon gave me $20, I don't know who he is. Like, is he from the government? Is he from an organization? I don't know.
What do you think you have to do to get Lex Friedman's super chats back?
I think I have to talk more pro Russia. Honestly, I don't know. Like, he blocked me because I kept being pro Ukraine. So that sucks.
So there you go. You're a pure man in a dirty world.
And you know what? Everyone still gives me shit about that. Even today, they're like, "Aren't you friends with Lex Friedman?" And look, I would love to be friends with Lex Friedman. Honestly, even if he is entirely wrong about Russia and Ukraine, but he decided he's going to block me because of that.
Well, I mean, God, this is segue to our whole conversation, but yeah. I think it's important for people to start recognizing what's within the zone of disagreement that's acceptable and what's like these boundaries that are un-American we're talking about. Like, should America be involved in a foreign conflict? That's very much within the boundaries. That's a policy discussion. We should argue about it. Should America be a theocracy? That's out of bounds. It's not, and I think these are clear lines, but I guess for some people it's not. And the fact that you have a policy preference about foreign wars is, I don't know, blasphemy or forbidden in some way.
It just is what it's just frustrating to me because I try, and I'm not perfect at it. I try to be like, okay, I want to remain genuine as a streamer. And look, I have had. If I had towed the line, I'm gonna tell you this, right? I'm not like if I had towed the line with the Lex Friedman stuff, well, I would have a show with Lex Friedman right now. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. And the clout and the money that would have come from that, I don't know. And then when people accuse me like, "Oh, you're just sucking up because you're getting paid by blah blah blah," or you just want to keep these clout friendships and you are afraid to criticize people, that's not. It's just the opposite of reality, and it frustrates me to the bone, okay? To the bone! But anyway, it's late. It's almost 8 o'clock. I don't want to keep you here too long. Give us your closing thoughts on all of this. Go.
America is a propositional nation. It's a proposition worth defending. We were founded on the idea that there are fundamental natural rights that are inherent to us, to who we are, and that we should have a government that honors and protects them. And that's who we are. That's what we're doing. And you can tell when people are attacking that, because if you understand it, you'll hear the lies. When someone comes in and says, and there's always a germ of truth in the great lie, they'll say, well, wasn't slavery real bad? And you'll go, yes, slavery was real bad. They'll go, so then shouldn't we reject the American experiment? No, because we are getting better. And on the right, when someone comes in and says, well, isn't it true that most of the founders were Christian? And you're like, yeah, that is true. And they say, well, isn't it true that there seems to be a lack of a moral center in today's America? And you're like, that does strike me as a problem. But that's not a reason to have a theocracy. And they'll come in with the sweet germ of truth. But if you understand where the boundaries are, it's easier to resist them. And hopefully we can do that and start telling a sexier story about why these values matter. And the next time we have an election, it'll be less stupid. That's where I'm at.
It'll be, oh, you sweet summer child, less stupid elections. I hope you're right. I fear you're wrong. Gang, if you want to find, where can people find you if they want to find you?
You can follow me on X or YouTube. Information's on the screen, Ryan C. Mullally. I've got the tiniest YouTube channel in the world, but I am trying to start uploading things as my Luddite technology allows.
Okay, well, thank you for coming. I'll talk to you later, okay, buddy?
Always a pleasure, buddy.
Bye.
See you later.
Man, oh man, oh man. Man, oh man, oh man. Did you guys like that conversation? It wasn't I don't know. What do you want me to fight about exactly? I think we have already gone over our disagreements. He is much more both sidesy than I am. But I did want to, and I think we did, talk about like these core values, which I think me and Ryan share. We disagree on the application on occasion. But yeah, I hope this is a good start to the week. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you guys had fun. I'm waiting for Prime to go live so I can write into him. What do we got coming up for the week? Okay, so first of all, if you did enjoy this content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you're following me on Twitch, hit that follow button. Feder Methodist for $5 says, I only watched this so I could fart on you for hosting another dummy dance. Imagine my disappointment when you had a great convo. Good job, Doodles. I tried it. Look, no one likes my great combos, though, gang. You guys only watch me when I have debates and stuff. These combos are probably my least numbers-wise productive shows.